From the truckload quoting page within Tai TMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tai-software.com to find out how Tai TMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome back to another edition of Check Call. Today we are covering the world of double brokering and freight fraud. Don't forget to subscribe to Check Call, the newsletter on FreightWaves.com if you haven't already. Before we get into our guest interview, there's some news in the world that you should check out. Cargo theft continued to be an issue across Mexico's roadways during the first 2 months of the year. Freight crimes across the country totaled 237 cases, with 129 incidents in January and 108 in February. According to Mexico's National Association of Vehicle Tracking and Protection Companies, the total number of cargo thefts during the first 2 months of 2023 represented a 29% decline compared to the total robberies in the first 2 months of 2022. David Roman, the president of Mexico's National Association of Vehicle Tracking and Protection Companies, said that despite the year-over-year decline in cargo thefts, more freight crime is occurring near industrial parks as new manufacturing investments pour into Mexico. We're seeing an increase in the rate of theft in these new industrial parks, with several parks that have recently opened, especially in the Bajío area, which is around central Mexico. The most stolen cargo includes food and beverage products, electronics, and home goods. There has been a different behavior from what's been occurring in previous years at a national level. They are seeing more of the robberies taking place during the week, oddly enough on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. I don't know why the middle of the week seems like a good day to get into some robbery, but any day I guess is as good as any. This week's Sonar Chart of the Week is the USDA's Produce Truckload Spot Raid. Produce truckload shipments can be a massive disruptive force to refrigerated capacity in the spring as harvest hits their peak out of California. Produce spoils quickly and needs to be moved quickly to have any return. Pair that with the fact that California has had the wettest winter in decades, putting many harvests at risk for reduced yields. This should put additional pressure on rates, but is happening as national truckload capacity is historically loose, with most spot rates continuing to slide through March. We could potentially be a few months out of peak activity, depending on how farmers have been able to handle the above average rainfall. So far, rates have been falling consistently out of Central and Southern California. Los Angeles to Dallas rates are still about 25% above the pre-pandemic March 2019 levels, but are down about 31% from last year. The overriding downward trend on rates will more than likely keep rates at bay when harvests do hit. Today, we are once again joined by the one and only Walter Mitch Mitchell, CEO of Tai Software. Welcome back to the show, Mitch.
Hey, thank you for having me. Real excited to be here again.
I am really excited about it because this is something that, we touched on a little bit in the 3PL Summit, and it's something that's honestly just been affecting the industry kind of almost worse than I've ever seen it before. And that's kind of, the amount of fraud that's running rampant and the double brokering and everything like that. So I'm excited to dive into it today because I personally don't have the right I don't have the right answer or a good answer to how to stop double brokering. But when it comes to, trying to stop it before it can even start or preventing it, what are some of these common practices that carriers or shippers or 3PLs should be using to kind of combat some of these double brokering situations?
Yeah, there is no right answer. And I think that's why you don't have the right answers. It's going to be a constant problem. And it's just like email phishing and some of the other security concerns that we have. Double brokering falls right into that. And the challenge is that as we build tools to get better, and as we start figuring out ways to stop double brokering and stop some of the fraud, the guys doing it are getting more sophisticated as well. So it's a constant game of cat and mouse, right? We have to adapt, and then we have to reevaluate, and then we have to adapt again, and we have to reevaluate and adapt again. So I think that's the primary thing that I would say is important, is we need to make sure that as we move along, that we're adapting and paying attention to what are the newest trends and what are some of the scams that are happening that are causing the double brokering and the scams to happen.
I think that's a really good point because you can only control what you can control. So, I mean, something as easy as not using a carrier that literally got their authority started yesterday is probably a pretty good place to start. But some of those like little practices in there, I think that that's really kind of something that, everybody gets in a hurry just trying to cover loads and everything like that. So I think that those are just sometimes like, we don't really need to focus on those right now. But that is really where it starts. The same as when you get those phishing emails, hey, maybe I shouldn't click. Or lately I've got a lot of like phishing text messages where it's like, your Netflix account is locked. And I'm like, I don't even have a Netflix account.
Exactly. And that's exactly it. Like being aware of what are some of the signs. And the other thing I think is really important is don't do it alone. Trying to, as a broker especially, that's one of the core responsibilities of a broker is to make sure they're preventing double brokering. And it's why shippers hire brokers, is so that they can be protected. It's not just about getting a good price. It's not just about getting the load coverage. It's about making sure that you're hiring a carrier that can competently move that load. And that's where brokers have to be the best. And that's where brokers have to be good at it. And so staying up on the technology, staying up on the tricks and the scams is so important. And then, like I was mentioning, don't do it alone. Don't feel like as a broker, you're on an island and just have to figure all this out. There are a ton of resources out there. Some of them published by FreightWaves, right? There's articles all the time. And I think it's something that we need to be diligent as an owner of a brokerage or as a broker moving loads to keep up on the news and to make sure that our teams are well aware of what are the trends. How do we prevent these? How do we keep on top of it so that we don't run into these double brokering situations?
Absolutely. I mean, it literally benefits no one. It costs more money. Like carriers potentially don't even get paid. It's just not, it's not good. And like, it's kind of like you're just trying to catch a ghost at the end of the day, which is almost impossible. But when it comes to kind of preventing it from starting, because once it happens, there's not really much you can do other than, pay way too much and go, well, we won't let it happen next time. What are some of these policies or procedures or really like some good things that people should have in place to protect themselves from whether it's double brokering or other carriers trying to commit just different levels of fraud?
Yeah, let's hit on a couple good ones. Number one, you already mentioned, is checking authority and checking when their authority was issued. Number two, insurance. Let's make sure their insurance is real. Number three, let's make sure their payment portal is accurate. This is one that's really hot right now too, right? Especially with all the news about Silicon Valley Bank and the challenges with the banking system. A really great scam right now is to go ahead and send out updated banking information. So let's verify that banking information really belongs to the right place and the right people. So those are a couple of the really high level ones. But as I was kind of mentioning, the don't do it alone, I think, is super important. And there's some really great tools out there like Highway, like Carrier Assure, like RMIS, that will help you with the onboarding and will help you verify that the carrier is real and to help you verify that the carrier's information is accurate so that you're using a community. Lean on the community. The community is strong, and the community, as you kind of said, like nobody wants to be subjected to the fraud or to the double brokering, because in the end, we can call it what it is. It's just flat out stealing. And we got to prevent it. And nobody in our community, none of the brokers, none of the carriers want to participate or want to be associated with it. So leveraging that and taking advantage of the tools is super critical to protect yourselves.
Oh, absolutely. I think we learned in the 3PL Summit last week that the TIA has like a TIA watchdog program. So you can submit carriers that are either double brokering or, like being suspicious or that you have suspicions of. And that way it kind of lets other people know that, hey, maybe just double check it. And yeah, it might take an extra 3 to 4 minutes just to double check something, but that extra 3 to 4 minutes before booking a load could save you hours, if not days, of trouble on the back end. And also a lot of money on the back end trying to make sure that you're not having to pay twice for a load or something like that.
That's right. That extra few minutes is super critical. And the extra few minutes, is where you should mitigate some of the challenge as well, right? And that's again where I talk about don't do it alone. Make sure that you have the tools available to you so that you can make that a 2 or 3 minute process instead of a 2 to 3 hour process. And then make sure you also have a TMS that integrates it nicely. So it's important that you, not just that you have that information, but that your entire system is working together to make sure that that information is available to you when you need to know it, right? So as you're sending out quotes, let's make sure that we're checking at that point, like before you even offer it to a potential carrier from a load board or wherever you found them. Let's make sure we block it from there. Or maybe use a tool like Parade, who focuses on previous relationships first. Because if you know you've had a successful load with a carrier, most likely they're going to be good for another load, right? So these tools can really help us, and using those tools integrated into your applications and integrated into your workflow so they're easy for your team to use is a very critical part of the process.
I like that, because that kind of goes back to something that we touched on last time you were here, where it's, you don't want to make sure that you don't want to make it so you have to go through like 4 or 5 screens just to book one load. You kind of want it all there, where you're improving the workflow, improving that end user experience, where you're not sitting there like, okay, well, I have this load, so I have to go through my TMS to quote it out and send it to them. But I have to go over here to double check, the history or the safety rating for this carrier. And then I have to go over here to look up my actual pricing situation. To have it all in one is fantastic. And then I guess just like when it comes, because it's not cheap to integrate software and to get all these different licenses. What's kind of like the one thing that you're like, this, even though it might be expensive up front, that long-term payoff is going to be better. So what's kind of like the one piece of advice you have to people that are like, thinking about doing this, but they're just kind of startled, or they have sticker shock by the price that would come from it? Because there's not necessarily like, there is value add, but some people might be a little hesitant to believe that,
Yeah, the value add is where you really have to pay attention, and it's tough on brokers. As a broker, your whole life is about margin, right? And so when you see like, oh, well, my goodness, this tool is pretty expensive. Maybe I don't really need it, or what are the chances? What's the risk? And the risk is big, right? The risk is real. One shipment loss, just the cost of that shipment is pretty high. But what if the shipper decides to really pursue the broker for it? And what if something really bad happens on that shipment? The liability that can pass on to the broker for just one shipment is enough to justify some of those tools. And that value add is something that you really have to spend a little bit of time and think about and justify. I can tell you all day that how important it is, but because I really strongly believe that a good investment in tools to assure that your business runs smoothly and assure that you're limiting your risk and liability is critical. But as a broker, I think you have to sit down and think about it on your own, and of what is the worst case position that I've been in, and what has that cost my company, not just in actual cost, but then think about it from the perspective of what's the opportunity cost that was lost from dealing with that, and making sure that we're being diligent up front. So critical to the process.
Oh, I feel like that would almost have to, sitting down and, okay, if it happened to one person, it might cost you a couple $1,000s, and it might have taken that person away from being able to book more loads or, secure more freight for a couple hours. So the opportunity cost isn't, it's just one time. But from what it sounds like from everyone I've talked to, this is happening regularly, and like it's almost like its own little pandemic in specifically the freight broker world, where it's just running rampant and everyone's having all these problems with it. So I think now more than ever, it's important, because like you said, we do have these visibility tools, we do have the tools in place, and we do have the technology there that can kind of at least give you a red flag of like, hey, this might become a problem for you. Like, sign the waiver and acknowledge that you might have to deal with this on the back end, but we're telling you this is probably not a good idea. Proceed at your own risk,
You're absolutely right. And your point about how often it's happening is relevant for sure, because it's not just one time. It's going to happen more frequently and more frequently every time. So that's where you really have to spend the time and effort and be up on it and pay attention and protecting yourselves so important in that process.
So I guess when it comes to, like you said, that, when it does happen, shippers they could pursue a broker, or they might want to just leave that brokerage altogether and go look for a new 3PL or a new freight brokerage. What are some of those, like, maybe not legal consequences, but some of those actual consequences that have a negative impact on the business outside of just having to write more money? Or like, what are some of these like worst case scenarios that could happen for if you get caught up in a fraud scheme or something like that?
Well, one challenge is liability of the freight, right? Is in that the broker could end up being liable to the freight. You're definitely going to have a problem with retaining that customer afterwards, for sure. So that's a little bit more of a soft cost. But if the freight's stolen and there's an accident, what kind of liability is the carrier going to take up there? And I'm going to be careful and tread lightly in there because I'm not a lawyer. So
that's completely fair.
Yep.
I should have double checked that. That was something that we need a lawyer for.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely don't want to tread on the lawyer's territory there, but that risk is real, and as I mentioned, it's one of the key elements to being a broker. It's not just about cost, and as a broker or as somebody who owns a brokerage, I think you have to be really aware of the point isn't just to find a truck to cover the load. You have to find a truck that can move that load confidently, right, to the best of your knowledge. And if as a broker you don't do that due diligence, and it can be demonstrated by a shipper or by the carrier or any third party that you didn't do that work, then you are liable beyond just the freight cost.
I think that's something that I think a lot of people forget in their day-to-day operations, because the liability is not something that honestly comes up that often, like in the day-to-day of a brokerage. As someone who spent some time in there, it's nobody really comes up. It's just like, oh, outside of, oh, this carrier or this shipper requires a higher level of insurance. Like, that's not something that anyone really talks about. It's just kind of like okay, have you used this carrier before? No. Okay, then we're going to try it out and see what happens. So I think that, I don't know, I maybe just, because it's hard to get individuals to really like change and care about it, but until it happens to them. But I would almost have to like plaster stuff all over the walls being like, double check your carriers.
You're absolutely right. And, that touches on another topic of the change and convincing people that, hey, you need to do these things. You need to take these steps. It's tough when we're in our day to day. The pace can be really fast. There's a lot of work going on. There's a lot of movement happening. And so that ties into what I was talking about a little earlier about the integration and making sure it's part of the process, not an exterior step to the process. And one of the key elements that comes in convincing people to change isn't necessarily just convincing them and convincing the brokers that, hey, checking this is important. I think we can all agree to that without much difficulty. But executing on that during the real world situations while we're dealing with phone calls, that can be a really difficult part. And so as a tool for facilitating change, one of the things that we can do is make it so that we create a path. And create a path for all of your brokers, create a path for your ops team so that path very clearly goes through the steps that they need. And it's harder for them to sidestep the process rather than making it hard for them to execute the process. And what I mean by that is make sure that the due diligence for your carriers is a step in the process as they move along, rather than making them go to a separate website, or rather than making them move away from their desk or hang up the phone and then go run through a different process. Make it so it flows directly, and it's the easiest process is to do it right, and that the easiest process is to do the due diligence. And what you'll see is the success rate and the integration into your workflow will make it higher. You'll make yourself a lot less susceptible to the fraudulent shipments and the fraudulent carriers. And overall, you'll see tremendous wins that'll be hard to measure, but your business will be better and you'll be more successful.
I really like that. You design something that, is designed where it's going to be harder to break the rules and have these problems. And you just kind of, if you stay on this path, which is going to be hard for you to get off of, then things will more than likely be okay.
Yeah, exactly. It ends up being very successful, and at the end, we're creatures of habit. So let's make it so that our habit and that path is easy to follow, and we will.
Yeah, of course. So when it comes, you touched on it, like where, through these integrations and everything like that, when someone has like a fully integrated TMS that has these carriers or these carrier notes, or they have the tools at their disposal, but if they're just starting in that process, what are some of those integrations that they should look for? Like, what are some of those partners that they should be maybe reaching out to or seeking out to help, fully integrate within their TMS?
Yeah, there's a bunch of them out there. One of the ones that we talk about and have seen a lot lately is Highway. And one of the reasons that Highway is interesting is how fast they can bring information back. So the turnaround time, instead of being 2 or 3 days, is getting down to hours. And that's great, because if an authority gets revoked or something along those lines, knowing about it quickly is worthwhile. So we see tools like Highway, Carrier Sure is gaining a lot of momentum. RMIS is, I think, probably one of the key standards. My Care Packets is really good. There's a bunch of tools out there that are great at doing this, and are specific to our industry and specific to what we do. And then, of course, all of those integrate nicely to Tai, because that's what we do.
I mean, a little humble brag. If you're going to go for a fully integrated TMS, just call Tai. It's a little humble brag on yourself. It's fine.
Yeah, we have to plug that out there a little bit, right?
It's not officially a plug. It's just a little humble brag that, like, we're just really good at it. So
exactly. Yeah, we try to keep it humble as much as we can.
Exactly. We are running out of time, so we already know where you stand on hot dogs and sandwiches, but this time we're going to get a little more exciting. We're going to give the people what they want, and the people, specifically myself, would like to hear your favorite dad joke.
All right. So I think dad jokes are an important part of life. I do have 2 younger kids, so very important.
So you are uniquely qualified for this very specific question.
It's a work in progress. I got to keep going to make sure that I can really embarrass my children as much as possible. But I wanted to keep it a little techie for you. So my dad joke for today is, what's another name for apple juice?
I feel like it has something to do with like a cell phone. Maybe like a drained battery?
iPhone charger.
Hey, that's a good one. I like that. I like that. That's a good one. So if somebody wants to find you outside of the show, maybe slide their own favorite dad joke into your DMs, or if they have any questions about software integration and, how to not get got by a double broker, where can they find you outside the show?
Yeah, you can find us at www.tai-software.com. And then we'll also be at all the FreightWaves conferences this year, as well as the TIA conference coming up later this month. You can also find us on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Just pretty much anywhere that you will already be, Tai is there. Just still being who they are.
We try.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Likewise. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Find Check All the Podcasts anywhere you get your podcasts, such as Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Don't forget to check out all the other incredible FreightWaves podcasts, such as At Your Doorstep and Put That Coffee Down.